Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many of you joining us live today. Thank you for taking the time to be here. You've made an excellent choice because this masterclass promises to give you fresh, real world insights into how global power dynamics are evolving beyond traditional borders. I'm Chetna Kapoor from Seed Global Education. We are a UK headquartered company that facilitates connections between leading global universities and students like yourselves. Our mission is to help aspiring students explore programs, connect with faculty and admissions team, and make informed decisions about their higher education and career goals. Before we begin, could everyone quickly share in the chat which city or country you're joining us from today? It's always amazing to see how global our audience is. So just take a moment and please, in the chat box, if you can put in where yours. There are people from Calcutta, Pakistan, from Japan, Bangladesh, Indore, Kashmir in India. There are people from Kerala, Gujarat. We have over 100 people dialed in right now. I'll give you 30 more seconds. Everyone, please put in the chat box where are you dialing in from. We have from Chennai, down south, up north from India. Very nice. Okay, so today's session is hosted by the Elliott School of International Affairs at the George Washington University, one of the world's leading institutions for students aspiring to shape global policy and diplomacy. Located in the heart of Washington, D.C., the Elliott School offers a unique vantage point for studying international affairs, surrounded by some of the most influential global organizations and policymakers. Our topic today, Firms as actors in contemporary international relations, explores how powerful private companies, especially in tech and pharmaceuticals, are increasingly influencing international agendas once driven solely by governments. We are truly honored to have two distinguished guests from the George Washington University with us today. First, please join me in welcoming Dr. Spear, Research Professor of International Affairs and Director of the MA in Security Policy Studies program. Dr. Spear has published widely on US foreign policy, arms control, post conflict peacebuilding, and global security studies. Her work offers deep insights into how states and non state actors interact in today's complex world. Welcome, Dr. Spear. We are delighted to have you with us today. Joining her is Daniel Goldstein, Associate Director of Graduate Admissions at the Elliott School of International Affairs. Daniel brings extensive experience in higher education and student affairs. She works closely with international students to help them navigate the admission process and find the right fit within the Elliott School's globally focused master's programs. Welcome, Daniel. It's wonderful to have you here. Before we dive in, let's start with quick interactive poll to get everyone thinking about today's topic. You will see the question pop up on your screen now. Yes, in your view, should powerful private companies like tech or pharma firms have as much influence as governments in addressing global crisis? I will give you 30 seconds to put in the answers. Do you think yes, their innovation and resources make them essential players? Do you think no, government should remain the primary decision makers? Or do you feel that both should share the responsibility? And if you have no opinion, then yeah, not sure or depends on the situation. All right, a few more seconds and I'm going to end the poll right about now. Okay, so the results are here. I think 47%, the majority feels that both should share the responsibility and work together. Thank you for sharing. That gives us a great sense of how diverse perspectives are in the room, which makes this discussion even more exciting now. Let's dive right in. Dr. Spear, over to you.
Thank you so much, and hello everybody. It's very nice to be with you. I'm just going to share my screen, and this will take a moment or two. And then I'm going to put up the presentation. Okay. So, what I'm going to be talking about today is the role of firms in international relations. And I think that while in security studies we often focus very much on what's happening here and now, it's important to actually look at some of the bigger trends, the tectonic plates that are changing. And I think this is, for me, this is one of the bigger trends that we need to keep an eye on. So you'll be very familiar with some of these logos and firms who are very powerful in international relations today. And some of them are very obviously important. So, for example, in America, without SpaceX, the private company owned by Elon Musk, American astronauts can't go to space. So that's a very obvious example of where a firm is very important. And with all these different firms, we can see them having influence, sometimes outsized influence on international politics. And particularly at the moment, there are big discussions about chip manufacturers and AI and the role that some of these really big, very powerful companies, the power they're beginning to wield, and what we should think about that. And as we saw in the poll, there are some different opinions about that, which is very interesting. But what I'm going to deal with today is actually pharmaceutical firms, which I think is a slightly less obvious example of powerful firms, but nevertheless, it has a lot of importance, and it did have a lot of importance during the pandemic. So that's the case study I'm going to present today. So this is a quote from the chief executive officer of Pfizer, a guy called Alfred Bourla. Multiple leaders of the world, they would reach out to me, from presidents or prime ministers and kings and general secretaries of organizations. So he's talking about the period of the pandemic when private firms held important knowledge that governments needed to enable them to create vaccines against the pandemic. So this was a situation where there was what Swati Srivastava has called critical bottlenecks of knowledge, where the firms were absolutely vital to the process. And as a consequence, these firms were doing very high level diplomacy. And also, in my opinion, they had their own foreign policies. And that's what I'm particularly interested in. So, in security studies, we always talk about the bottom line up front. So when you write an essay, it's not a who done it. You tell people from the start who did it and why. So my project I'm working on at the moment is really focused on the Western biotechnology and pharmaceutical firms who created vaccines against COVID-19. I'm interested in the domestic strategies they used in negotiations with what we might call their home states, although that's a very contested concept in a world of multinational corporations. I'm also in their strategies, interested in their strategies and negotiations with other states over vaccine sales and over subsidies and things like that. And I would call that their foreign policies. And I'm also interested in their relationships with other companies, that is interfirm foreign policies. So, and I need to say straight off that I think firms have their own foreign policies, but this is not necessarily conspiratorial. I think firms should have foreign policies because they need to have a strategy for how they deal with other governments. So it's not necessarily a conspiratorial thing, but sometimes when you look at what you've done, what they've done, it becomes a little bit darker. So we'll get to that. Now, I know nobody wants to think about the pandemic anymore, but this is just a reminder of the timeline that it was only in January 2020 that we got the genetic sequence for SARS-CoV-2, also known as COVID-19. And that's when the real work could begin all around the world on creating vaccines. And by spring 2020, there were 180 different vaccine candidates worldwide, created in lots of different institutions, government laboratories, universities, private companies, involving philanthropies. There was all sorts of things going on. But what we have is surprisingly quickly, we have some vaccines coming out. And Russia's Sputnik 5 was authorized in August 2020, and the Chinese vaccine CanSino was authorized in September 2020. And so they certainly run the race to be quickest. Whether they have the best vaccine, I think, is now much less sure. And then we had the first Western vaccines actually being put into arms, and that was the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine in the UK, and that was in December. So compared to normal timelines for delivering vaccines, a new vaccine from start to finish, usually that's a 10-year process, maybe 30 years, depending on how urgent the issue is. So to do it so quickly was absolutely amazing. And the private sector was very important to this. So, in the race for a vaccine for the West, there were a number of what we call vaccine titans, traditional makers of vaccines from around the world. Sanofi from France, GlaxoSmithKline from the UK, Merck from Germany, and also there was a new firm called CureVac working in Germany, which was working on mRNA. And these titans and CureVac were expected to be amongst the first to produce a vaccine. But interestingly, they all failed. So the companies you normally expect to be the ones leading the way in the end weren't. But we did have successful vaccines from Moderna, Pfizer BioNTech, AstraZeneca Oxford University, Johnson and Johnson, and eventually Novavax. So some of the winners were not the ones we expected, which is quite interesting. So here, beg your pardon. Here I've given you a definition of foreign policy as I see it. Um, and you can read it for yourselves, but basically it talks about it's actually something deliberately formulated by people in authoritative positions. So that could be a government or it could be the top echelons of a firm. And they actually have a vision of what they want to achieve beyond themselves in terms of affecting the environment and things like that. And this is a very old definition, but it was interesting to me when I began this work that there really weren't any good definitions of a firm actually having a foreign policy. So that's what I worked with. And now, of course, there we go. So there were 2 points where firms had particular power in their negotiations with states. The first was very early on when the private firms had what we call the vaccine platforms that states needed to access. And a platform could be something like messenger RNA, it could be a viral vector platform. There were a number of different ways in which vaccines were created. And what is interesting is that most states did not have the intellectual property, the technologies, all the other things that you need to make a vaccine. So they were reliant on private sector, and the private sector was able to extract concessions from them. And then at a later point, once firms had vaccines that were proved and they had doses to give out, they had a lot of power who got doses, which countries got them, how many, and how quickly. And those vaccination choices had very, very big implications for national economies and politics and opening up countries again. So there were very critical power there. So This just reflects this early situation. Before trials had even been finished for the various vaccines, governments were already signing contracts with multiple firms to try and get big amounts of doses. So they didn't rely on one firm. They contracted with several. The US contracted with six different firms. The UK worked with four, I think. So one of the things that was happening was rich companies were just countries were throwing money at the problem, um, in the hope that one of the things they backed would actually produce a vaccine. And smaller and poorer countries were in an interesting situation because they were also scrambling to obtain vaccines. And one of the ways they did this was to try to make themselves attractive places for the companies to do business. And that included things like recruiting volunteers for trials, which is usually something that the firm would do, having their populations participate, managing the vaccine supply chain, including filling and finishing, providing indemnity against future legal actions. That was very important to the firms, and sharing population past and future health data. That Israel did that deal with Pfizer, and it was a blockbuster deal. And also, some smaller states paid more in order to ensure that they got their doses in a timely way. So the firms were in a really strong position to extract concessions that they wanted, and they did not hold back. So I mentioned there were some new players involved in this process, and these are the ones that are probably quite familiar to you now. We've got BioNTech, which is a German company, but was founded by diaspora from Turkey. And they'd been working on using mRNA for cancer treatments, but they turned their attention once they realized what was happening in terms of COVID-19. They shifted to a vaccine for that coronavirus. Moderna is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is quite a new company, again, founded in 2009 with venture capital funding, and that very much influenced the way they approached the market. They were very, very keen to make big profits. So when they'd been working on mRNA for a while, but when they turned to vaccines, their board and venture capital backers were not keen because actually that's not a very profitable area of pharmaceuticals. So Novavax is based in Virginia, which is not too far from where we are today, and was a biotech startup which was actually on the brink of economic disaster when the pandemic came along, and they were very grateful for the lifeline that that provided them. And outside of the US again, just as we had BioNTech in Germany, we had the Oxford University Jenner Institute and the Oxford Vaccine Group, who it was a university, obviously, but they'd been working on a new vaccine platform, ChAdOx, and that became the basis for their new vaccine as well. And then there were some established firms with vaccine expertise who were in the race as well. So turning to the new players, all of them were young biotechnology entities without many established relationships, either domestic or international. But obviously, as I've said, they had unusually strong hands to play because they had potentially the vaccines that states desperately wanted. Importantly, none of these players had been through phase 2 or 3 clinical trials, which is a very big, important process for drug safety, and they had never brought a product to market. So they'd never produced vaccines on a large scale, so they didn't have big enough manufacturing facilities. They couldn't necessarily run trials. They couldn't produce the vast amounts of doses that would be needed. So their question was, how were they going to do this? So, whereas the other firms had established foreign and domestic policies, these actors did not. So, they had to decide what to do, and they decided different things. So, Moderna and Novavax decided to go it alone. They decided to run their own trials, make their own relationships with buyers of vaccines from different countries and also with regulatory bodies. They decided to build their own supply chains and do their own marketing and contracts. BioNTech in Germany decided to work with a more experienced company and it chose Pfizer. Now, Pfizer is an American company, very well established, and it had relationships with regulatory bodies around the world because it's a global company. It had global supply chains and was a very established and known player in the pharmaceutical sector. So BioNTech chose to shift that work to Pfizer in their relationship. And actually, what's interesting now, we now tend to call it the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, whereas actually the originators, sorry about that, that's a fire truck going by, the originators were actually BioNTech. The Oxford University effort had already begun to set up manufacturing and international supply chains. And when they were quite into this process, the university chose to work with an Anglo-Swedish company called AstraZeneca. But this did come with a challenge because although AstraZeneca was a very big pharma firm, it had never worked on vaccines before. Now, initially, the University of Oxford had also considered the company Merck. But Merck, although it's German, has a very, very big presence in the US. And they were worried that US politics might not allow them to ship doses of vaccines out of America. So they decided against working with Merck and went with AstraZeneca. So, what am I thinking about this case? Well, first, I think firms are not all the same. They have different interests and different priorities, and these get dialed up and down depending on what's going on. And this does lead them to different domestic strategies and foreign policies. And firms often talk about their missions, but actually, where the rubber hits the road, particularly in terms of pharmaceuticals, is prices. And the prices that firms charged for the vaccines told us a lot about what really mattered to that firm. So Oxford, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson sold their vaccines at cost. They agreed that until the pandemic was over, they would make no profits. They saw it as a public duty to contribute to this problem. And interestingly, the UK government had actually said to Oxford AstraZeneca that they didn't mind them making a profit. But the university decided that because it was such a bad situation, they did not want to be seen to be profiting from it. Now, BioNTech Pfizer established a sliding scale for prices depending on the economic situation of a particular state. So, for an advanced industrial country, they charged more than they would charge for a poorer country, and it went down to supplying at cost to a very poor state. And at the other end of the scale, Moderna went for maximum prices because they were a new firm, they'd never made a profit before, and the venture capital that backed them was desperate to actually yield some benefit from this invention. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the main firms, and then I'll jump to conclusions. So Moderna decided to take money from the US Operation Warp Speed. And they actually took a lot of money, and they don't like to admit quite how much they took now. But this had the advantage of meaning that they weren't working at risk. They didn't have much money in the bank, so it was very helpful for them to take this money. Novavax made the same choice. Now, having actually got completely subsidized to create the vaccine and having initially negotiated a price for the vaccine, they'd initially wanted a lot more than the US government was willing to pay on top of all the subsidies. They'd actually agreed about $30 for a course of doses with the US government in the first round. But when we began to see variants and new vaccines were required, in 2022, when the US government was no longer subsidizing things, Moderna announced that its new dose would cost $130. And there was an immediate outcry because Moderna had had so much government subsidy and now it was trying to, in their view, really, well, in the view of critics, was really trying to benefit from this situation. And in this situation, Senator Bernie Sanders said he was going to hold a Senate hearing just into Moderna's price strategy. And Moderna immediately caved and said, oh, no, we were wrong. We're just going to make sure everybody can get it. But their expectation was that the price would still be pretty high, but that US medical insurance companies would pay it. Now, since the pandemic has lessened, Moderna has now actually sued part of the US government over who owns the license for mRNA technologies. And it's still suing both the government and other companies over who owns the genetic sequence for the vaccine. So, it didn't necessarily change its approach to negotiating with the US government. They tried to sell vaccines early on to the UK. And Kate Bingham, who was running the UK's vaccine task force effort, said they found it very, very difficult to negotiate with Moderna, that they always used hardball tactics and had a kind of a take it or leave it approach. And the UK didn't buy from them until late 2021 because they found them so difficult to deal with, and they wouldn't compromise. In the African Union, they were also negotiating with Moderna, and Moderna wanted $32 to $37 per dose, and 2 doses of Moderna were needed. So that was incredibly expensive. But instead, the African Union bought Pfizer for basically $13 for 2 doses and $10 for the single J&J dose. So just a complete contrast in what they were trying to do. And by March 2020, the countries they had sold to were the richer countries. So they'd sold to Japan, to Canada, to South Korea, to the US, and to the European Union. And as I mentioned before, they also have been suing other companies over who owns the patent for mRNA. So they're kind of hardball company. Another one that is sort of in that camp, but not quite so much, is BioNTech Pfizer. Now, Pfizer chose not to take aid from US Operation Warp Speed. It decided to fund everything itself at great risk, in the expectation that if they had taken money from the US government, the US government would try and control where their doses could go, and they didn't want that. And they did, after their vaccine was proven, they did increasingly good deals with the European Union, where actually personal relationships played a role. And one of the things that the pandemic showed is that relationships really matter. In terms of foreign policy, they did an amazing deal with Israel. And Israel was so desperate to get its hands on doses that they offered to pay more than Pfizer was asking for. And also, in exchange for early doses, to give all past and future national vaccine data to Pfizer. And this was incredibly valuable data. So Pfizer took the deal. So Israel got some of the earliest doses. It also produced in effect, they were doing pharmacovigilance. So they were looking at how everything went when a large population was vaccinated. And this helped to show how good the Pfizer dose was. And it was actually marketing for them as well, because everybody was reporting on what was happening in Israel. And even though, for example, it was a two-dose regimen, after the first dose, people had something like 80% protection. So it worked really well for them. And as you will see here, as I've noted before, they did do good business in the UK, and the UK did an early deal, so they got better terms than the European Union. And so that was important to them. In the African Union, as I mentioned, they charged cost price of $6.75 per dose, so about 13 bucks all, well, 14 bucks all told. But those doses only became available later. So South Africa wanted doses earlier, so it paid $10 a dose. And the country also had to pay Pfizer 40 million in advance. So there was a lot of risk for South Africa in that. Now, overall, during the pandemic, BioNTech Pfizer sold to 60 countries, and they made some amazing deals, including countries not being able to tell their parliaments about the costs they paid for their doses, demanding indemnity if there were any problems found with the doses, demanding that a country take out a bond to ensure that they would be paid even if the country went broke. So they were able to really leverage their position to get some great deals. Now, Oxford AstraZeneca was really a bit different. They decided from the start that they were going to do regional production of vaccines, including in India. And this required sharing intellectual property, which they were happy to do because their focus was on ending the pandemic. By contrast, Moderna is still fighting over intellectual property. So that was a real difference. In the UK, they worked with the Vaccine Task Force, which helped them get things ready to go. And then they had a contract from May 2020. They did do a big deal with the European Union, but that relationship got tangled up in international politics when the UK was leaving the European Union in what we call Brexit. And once it seemed that doses were coming to the European Union slower, then relationships with AstraZeneca really, really plummeted to a bad situation. Now, the US had actually seen AstraZeneca as absolutely crucial to their plan, and they had given the company more than $1 billion to get everything up and running in the United States to make 300 million doses. However, there were problems with some of the trials, which were actually run not by AstraZeneca itself, but by a private company. And then side effects were discovered. So actually, AstraZeneca got a lot of money, but never actually got permission to authorization to use the vaccines in the US. And again, you can see that with the African Union and South Africa, the deals were better. And indeed, the Serum Institute of India was making the Oxford AstraZeneca doses that were going to go to the African Union. But with a new COVID-19 variant emerging, it wasn't clear that the AstraZeneca jab could prevent mild variants. So South Africa decided not to buy. But as you can see, they sold to a wide range of countries, including 6 different Latin American countries. And in terms of outcomes from the pandemic, even though eventually the AstraZeneca jab was discontinued, it's thought that they actually saved the most lives globally, in part because they did regional production, which meant that people got vaccine doses earlier, and earlier saved more lives. Okay, so Johnson and Johnson, they did take US Operation Warp Speed money, but the US government gave them a firm to work with that it actually managed, called Emergent Biotech, and that was a disastrous firm. And Johnson and Johnson's reputation took a hit. Initially, like the AstraZeneca dose, it was very, very successful, but then there was the discovery of serious but rare side effects. And this led the US to pause its use. And even though it was actually reviewed and decided that the benefits of the vaccine outweighed the problems, its kind of reputation in the US had taken such a hit that it wasn't really used again. And of course, when we began to get some variants coming through, it became clear that the ones that used a viral vector platform couldn't be changed sufficiently quickly. So then everything became about mRNA, which meant that Moderna and BioNTech got a lot more power in the next round of negotiations. Okay, I should be finishing off here. So let me just say, why does it all matter? I think there's a couple of things going on because some of the countries involved didn't really understand how much companies had their own interests. So firms got into very difficult relationships with their home governments over, what prices they charged and what profits they could make, and later over intellectual property. So there were some frictions that the countries didn't necessarily expect. And a good example is that the French government assumed that because Sanofi was a French company, it would make France a priority. But it actually didn't, because it took Operation Warp Speed money. So that became the priority. And that caused an absolute outcry in France. The other thing was that the US had an attitude that the firms that work for them could only produce for Americans. So if a firm wanted to also sell abroad, it needed separate supply chains. Otherwise, the US had the right to seize the doses. So they duplicated all their supply chains outside the US. And as soon as the US was vaccinated, they moved all their energy over into international markets and produced a lot in the European Union and just exported around the world from there. So what seemed to be in the short term a really good strategy for the US became a bad strategy because they then missed out on a lot of tax revenue and innovation. There were also assumptions that some company actions were because of vaccine nationalism, and this wasn't always correct. I mentioned the case of AstraZeneca getting caught up with the Brexit problems, and Pfizer BioNTech did a bit too. So states could really misunderstand firms' motivations, which actually made it quite difficult for them to negotiate with them. So I've put a couple of the consequences there. And I think going forward, what we're really seeing is change is still happening in the pharmaceuticals and biotechnology sector. And one of the things that the firms are doing now is they are doing regional manufacturing. And that is because they think that the global order, the trade order, is really breaking down. And we could talk about that in terms of tariffs and things like that as well. But now they want to make sure that they're producing in the Americas, but also in Europe, in Asia, and things like that. So really splitting up their production so that they don't get caught up in these sorts of problems where they can't move their pharmaceuticals into the markets they want to. And of course, they have got caught in the tariff wars that President Trump initiated too. So There's some thoughts. There's lots more to talk about, I'm sure. And I know you'll have lots of really good questions. So let me stop talking now and hand over to Chetna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Spear. That was an incredibly insightful look at how the boundaries between governments and global corporations are shifting and what that means for future leaders in international relationships. Now, to help our audience understand how they can develop the skills to navigate and influence this evolving global landscape, we have Daniel Goldstein with us to share more about the graduate programs at the Elliott School, including curriculum highlights, admission details, and unique benefits of international students. But before we hand it over to Daniel, let's do a quick pulse check with our audience. You will see another poll on your screen, which will come about right now. Yes, it's on your screen. What motivates you most to pursue a degree in international affairs? Let me give you a few seconds to answer that. Is it making a positive global impact, building a career in diplomacy or policy, expanding your international network and experience, or gaining deeper academic and cultural understanding? Take a few seconds to choose the option that best fits you. And I will end in another next 10 seconds. All right. Ending it right now, and the results are on your screen. Oh, 31% feels that it is to expand. The biggest motivation is to expand their international network and experience, followed by building a career in diplomacy or policy. Followed by gaining deeper academic and cultural understanding, and very closely building a career in diplomacy or policy. All right, I will now hand it over to Danielle to tell us more about the Elliott School.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Danielle Goldstein. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Admissions at the Elliott School of International Affairs here at the George Washington University. If you enjoyed Dr. Spear's session and you can see yourself taking a class with her as an Elliott School grad student, I'm excited to provide you with some more information about our school and how to become a student here. So to start off, here are the options that you'll have in terms of the programs we offer. So we offer 8 Master of Arts programs. We also have 2 specialized master's degrees and 2 joint degree options. And then we are also offering a new STEM designated accelerated MS in international economic policy. And that takes only a year and a half to complete. All of our programs are interdisciplinary and they cover a wide range of topics. Each program offers anywhere between 4 and over 15 concentrations that students can choose from, and some programs even allow students to choose multiple concentrations or even to create your own. So you'll have a ton of flexibility to customize your program for your specific interests. Here are some of the strongest features of our school that you'll find across all of our programs, all of which really contribute to the value of your Elliott School degree. So one of the biggest keys to our entire student framework is the flexibility that's built into your degree program. So we offer both a fall and a spring start, which begin in August and January, respectively. That means you can start your program when the timing is right for you. All of our courses are held in the evenings, and we do that for a really important reason. Our programs were built with students' best professional interests in mind, and we want to allow students to take advantage of our unique location. Since all of our courses start at 5 p.m. or later, students have the opportunity to work or hold an internship or volunteer during the day, and then come to campus for class in the evening. Now, the capstone experience will likely be one of the most memorable and impactful parts of all of your studies because of how it brings together everything that you've learned so far in your grad program and applies it in a hands-on, real-world scenario. The capstone course is generally completed over 2 consecutive semesters, where you'll sign up for a class based on a thematic topic. That might be something like foreign policy or international security, you'll form small groups of about 3 or 4 other students to formulate a research proposal, and then you have the option to work alongside an actual client to determine deliverables. The skills that you develop through this process and by completing your final research paper and presentation prepare you for employment immediately after you graduate. And then one final favorite element that all of our programs share is our skills courses. These courses are built around feedback that our Graduate Student Services Office receives from surveys that they send out to domestic and international employers. And these courses allow students to stay up to date on the skills that employers are looking for in competitive candidates for the careers and internships that they have right now. All right, so as you've probably already discovered, a graduate education of the caliber that you'll get at the Elliott School is a significant investment. And so I'm sure you have questions about fellowship opportunities and other ways to reduce your tuition expenses. And so here you can see the deadlines by which you'll need to submit your application in order to be considered for Elliott School fellowships. If you are applying for our fall term, which starts in late August, you want to submit your application by January 7th. If you're applying for the spring semester, which starts in January, you'll want to submit your application by October 1st. Of course, that date has passed for this year, but just keep that in mind if you want to apply for a future spring start term. And all that you need to do is submit your application and all of your materials by these deadlines and indicate on your application that you want to be considered for fellowships. There's no additional application here that you need to submit. Keep in mind that we offer only partial tuition scholarships here at the Elliott School. Typically, we cover anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 per semester. So because our Elliott School fellowships only cover part of tuition, we always really strongly encourage you to look for additional fellowship opportunities. And there's a couple things that you can look into here. So we have housed centrally at GW, but outside of the Elliott School, is the Office of Graduate Student Assistantships and Fellowships. They offer some additional fellowship opportunities, but unlike the Elliott School fellowships, they do require separate applications. They have different deadlines and different requirements. So as you're exploring those options, just make sure you take a note of that. You'll also find scholarships and resources outside of GW. You might be familiar with some really prominent fellowship opportunities like Fulbright, but there are a ton of other opportunities out there that are worth looking into. One really great resource for scholarships in the field of international affairs specifically is APSIA. This is the Association for Professional Schools of International Affairs. Their website offers an extensive directory of fellowship opportunities, and you can really kind of search to narrow things down based on what would be applicable to you and your situation. So their website is a great resource. And then we also do our best to provide a wide variety of graduate school funding options on our website. Again, be sure you review all of these resources available to you to look for whatever deadlines and requirements they might have. There's a lot there on our website. There's a lot to look through, but we really encourage you to look into all of these resources to give yourself a broad understanding of the ways that you might be able to reduce the cost of your education. I'll quickly go over our application prerequisites and required materials here, but keep in mind that we go into a lot more detail about all of these on our website, so be sure you're checking that out. So the first thing I want to note is that some of our programs have 1 or 2 or 3 prerequisites. Some of them have none at all. Those might include foreign language, economics, calculus prerequisites. So again, more information about what fulfills those prerequisites and which programs have which of them can be found on our website. So to apply, you'll need to fill out our online application. The application fee is waived for those of you who are attending today's info session. So when the application asks you if you have a fee waiver code, you'll select yes, and then enter the code that you see here, which is ESIA SEED 2025. That code is case sensitive, so make sure that you enter it in all capital letters. You'll need to submit a resume or a CV and your statement of purpose, and there are 2 prompts to choose from for your statement of purpose. We require 2 letters of recommendation, and we ask that you submit 1 academic reference and 1 professional reference. We require transcripts from all institutions that you've attended, as well as translations of those transcripts if they're not in English. Your bachelor's degree does have to be equivalent to a US four-year bachelor's degree. Typically, we evaluate most transcripts in-house, so we don't require an external credential evaluation. But if we are unable to determine that your degree is equivalent to a US four-year bachelor's degree, we might ask you to provide a course-by-course credential evaluation. In terms of GPA, we don't have a minimum GPA requirement. We review applications holistically, but just to give you a sense, our average GPA for incoming students last year was about a 3.6 on a 4.0 scale. In terms of standardized test scores, most of our programs are test blind, which means that we don't accept GRE scores at all. We do have 2 programs that are test optional, which means that you are allowed to submit GRE scores if you would like to. Just keep in mind that none of our programs require the GRE. And then finally, international applicants are required to submit English language test scores, and we accept TOEFL, IELTS, PTE, and Duolingo. And here are the minimum score requirements for English language tests. And again, you can find all of this on our website. So I know we have a little bit of time for questions, but just in case I don't get your question answered today, or if you think of one in the days ahead, please feel free to email us at esiagrad@gw.edu. We also invite you to attend a virtual information session where we will go into a lot more depth about our programs, the opportunities and supports available to our students, and much more that we have to offer. We typically host a few virtual information sessions each month, so you can sign up through that QR code or the link there on your screen, and hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was wonderful. It's clear that the Elliott School offers not just rigorous academics, but also the practical skills and opportunities students need to build meaningful global careers. Now it's time to open the floor for your questions. I will take up the first question that is for Dr. Spear. Shweta Surve is asking that WEF promotes participation of global conglomerates in shaping global policy making. Should multiple intergovernmental organizations take this approach? Can you highlight global impact of the same?
Okay, thank you so much for this question. So you're right that the World Economic Forum promotes global firms taking a role in global policymaking. The whole point of intergovernmental organizations is supposed to be to play a role in global policymaking. So, but they tend to cluster around particular issues like the World Health Organization or something like that. So that's certainly what they are trying to do. But I think what's become obvious, particularly in what we might call the more niche intergovernmental organizations, is that often the personnel who go from the state to do the negotiations are actually from firms. They actually represent the state, but they come from a firm there. So there's something called Intelsat, which organizes satellite traffic so that satellites don't bump into each other and do governance in the area of satellites. And a lot of the people who go representing states to those meetings are actually from firms that make satellites because they have the expertise. It's not clear with some of these intergovernmental organizations that the government actually has the time or the expertise to do this. So they tend to farm it out. So in some ways, even though firms are supposed to be there representing the government where they're based, there is a firm input that way as well. So it's kind of an interesting situation. But it is more broadly the case, and in line with this question, that intergovernmental organizations are now struggling to have the impact that working with global corporations can have. You know, the balance of power has shifted a bit. But thank you for the question. It was great.
Thank you. I see Daniel is already answering some questions. So I will, Dr. Spear, I'll hit you up with another question now. How does the concept of structural power which is where the firms shape the environment in which states must operate, better explain the vaccine deals than traditional models based purely on state-to-state relations?
Okay, that's another good question. I think at this point, I would talk about technological power rather than structural power. So I don't think we're quite at the point yet, although we're heading in the direction of travel is definitely that way, where firms have got structural power. And partly this is about regulation. To be clear, I believe in regulation. I believe that the behavior of firms, both domestically and internationally, should be subject to rules because I think otherwise you can get bad actors and bad outcomes. So I'm definitely in the regulation camp. And regulation is one way in which governments retain structural power so they can determine how their national market works, and also through organizations like the World Trade Organization, they can organize the rules of the game. So I do think that Priyanka is correct that it's not just about state-to-state relations anymore. It's definitely a more complicated negotiation that goes on. And it would not be feasible now for a government to say, I'm only going to deal with other governments. I'm not going to negotiate with firms. They really can't do that. So there has been a change, but I'm not quite sure that we're at the point where firms shape the environments for states. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, Priyanka has asked another follow-up question that beyond lobbying, what non-transparent mechanisms of influence or leverage did the biotechnology and pharmaceutical firms use in their negotiations with various governments?
Thank you for that. So I think one thing that was leveraged a lot were pre-existing relationships. And that's why a firm like Pfizer was able to do deals in 60 countries because it already had relations in 60 countries. And this was a very interesting situation because normally a firm is lobbying to get their product into a particular market. In the pandemic, firms were being lobbied by countries to get their product. So the balance of power was really different. So some of the things that happened were things that countries offered firms, not that firms demanded. So it was a really Freaky Friday-like situation where everything's the reverse of what you would normally expect. But using personal relationships, that's not strictly defined as lobbying, but that was going on a lot. So there were also, but really it was just the idea that particularly if you were a state with a small population or you didn't have much money, then you weren't automatically an attractive place for a firm to put its vaccine. So what could you do to make yourself more attractive? And you were lobbying them, which is a very unusual situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Danielle, this question is for you now. Just a second, sorry, I lost the question. What is the fellowship consideration deadline for fall admission, and what specific qualities or background experiences makes an applicant competitive for Elliott School fellowships?
Sure. So I can definitely answer the first part, and then I might ask Dr. Spear to jump in here. So the fellowship deadline for the fall start terms, that's the term that will begin in late August, is January 7th. So you just apply by that deadline and we will consider you automatically for fellowships. Now, the things that we consider for your fellowships are similar to what we consider for admissions. So we're looking for the same types of things. It is a holistic review process. We're factoring in what your academic background is, what your work background is, if you have any work experience. We are looking at your recommendation letters. We're looking at the undergrad institution that you attended, all sorts of things like that. So that's kind of a general idea. Dr. Spear, do you want to talk at all about what the admissions committee looks for in a strong applicant for admission?
Also, just to like add one more point here, there have been multiple questions around, like, do you think it's also equally important to understand business and economics alongside traditional diplomacy and security studies? Are Somebody has asked, are all liberal arts subjects important to gain a grasp on if they want to, or if they aspire to work in international relations and public policy?
Okay, that's a
Yep,
big
I'll pass that
bundle
one.
there.
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah,
have
yeah,
a
yeah.
back
It's
at
a
that
big bundle,
bundle.
but it is just connected to what makes an applicant
Yes.
competitive. Yes, so
Yes. So Danielle is correct that we look at the whole profile of the person. And if they don't have much work experience, but they've done some interesting volunteering over a longer period of time, we count things like that as well. We take the statement of purpose quite seriously, where you, as an applicant, get the chance to tell us about yourself and also why you're interested in coming to the Elliott School, what it is you really want to do. So we take those very seriously. And we can tell if people haven't taken it very seriously. And we can also tell if it's AI generated. So don't do that. So that's important too. In terms of what you need to understand nowadays, it's interesting. I had a meeting not so long ago with somebody from the US intelligence community, and I asked him what kind of skills they wanted from our security policy studies students. And I was a bit surprised by one of his answers because he said economics. He said, so many people don't understand the impact of economics on security issues. And this is really helpful. So, most of the programs you can do at the Elliott School, you will do some economics. Even our security students, they'll either do some statistics or something like that because it is an important base to cover. Now, obviously, you can't study everything. So you have to make choices. And I think a good thing to think about is to not repeat something you've already done. So if you did general international affairs in your first degree, then do something more specialized. If you're from a science background and you're transferring over to international politics, that's great because you've got new things to bring to the table and you can probably combine them in really interesting ways. But I do think, even if it's not part of your formal study, actually knowing a little bit about business and economics is very helpful. And that can be as simple as regularly reading a quality journalistic publication to figure out what's going on. And I'll give you an anecdote on this. In 2008, there was a recession in the United States caused by a collapse of subprime mortgages. And I realized that I, as a mature professional, did not understand what was going on. So that's when I subscribed to the Financial Times because I realized that I just had to get to terms with this. And I then realized that not anybody understood really what was happening. It was much harder and there were lots of different views. But since that day, I have learned so much about how the global economy works and what's going on. And that has, even though it's not part of my formal studies, it's kind of had a big impact on me and it's begun to influence my research agenda too. So that would just be an example. Does that answer it, Chetna?
yes, it does. It does. It beautifully does. All right. Daniel, this one is for you. Just a second. Are there any specific scholarships or financial aid options for international students? And if you can just give some insights on internship and career opportunities that are accessible for students during the program.
Sure. Yes, so for international applicants, we consider you for the same scholarships that we do for our domestic applicants for US citizens. The process is the exact same. We don't really differentiate at all. We don't really even look at if you're an international student or a domestic student. So all of our applicants are eligible for the exact same fellowships. So yes, you will be considered for fellowships as an international student. In terms of non-Elliott School scholarships, that's where you're going to have to dig in a little bit to our website and maybe the APSIA website to look for opportunities that are available for international students. Again, you just have to really kind of dig in there and look into the specific requirements for each scholarship. In terms of internships and career opportunities while you are a student, the first thing I'll plug is our Graduate Student Services Office. I think I've briefly mentioned them, but they are housed within the Elliott School, and that is an office that contains our Graduate Career Development Office, our academic advisors, and our Global Experiential Education or Study Abroad Office. So it's kind of a one-stop shop where our current students can go and get all of their questions answered and get a really kind of comprehensive support system for all of those things that you're looking to do, including getting internships and jobs while you're a student and after you graduate. So specifically our Graduate Career Development Office, your career coach will work with you from about a couple months before you enroll through your time as a student, and then even after you graduate to help you get those internship and job opportunities. We have a really extensive database called Handshake of all sorts of on and off-campus jobs that you can look into. International students are allowed to work on campus part-time for your first semester and then off-campus part-time after your first semester. And then also international applicants are, of course, international students are eligible to apply for OPT to continue working here in the US for 1 to 3 years after you graduate. And our career coaches are there for you the whole time to walk you through that process.
All right. Okay, one final question for Dr. Spear. What kind of mindset or analytical lens should young professionals cultivate to navigate this new world where governments, corporations, and NGOs are constantly overlapped?
That's a great question. I think having an open mindset will be particularly helpful because it's not clear that one theoretical lens or approach gets everything. So being questioning and considering trying to figure out what's going on and being receptive to the fact that there are very obvious changes, but there are also some changes going along below the surface that matter. I think that that will be very helpful to you. I think as young people coming into this, wildly interesting but wildly problematic world of international affairs, change is the norm. So having an openness to changing yourself and also noting change and being ready to change your mindset if the one you have isn't working is the best way to go.
Thank you. Thank you. Daniel, one last tip if you have to give to the young professionals applying, what would that be?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I would say get yourself into a position where you can prepare for the process before you're even starting to work on your application in the online application portal, and even after you're going to potentially get admitted to schools. So what I mean is make sure that you're documenting the deadlines and requirements for every school that you're looking to apply to, because unfortunately, we don't make it super easy for you. All of the schools have different requirements and statement of purpose prompts. So just make sure that you're getting yourself organized around that and know what all of that is and have everything ready to go by the deadline. And part of that preparation process is really paying attention to your statement of purpose. So like Dr. Spear was talking about, it's incredibly important to put your focus on that, especially because once you get to the point of actually submitting your application, that's the thing that you have most control over, right? Your resume is the past many years that you've built up. Your recommendation letters are out of your hands once you ask your recommenders to write them for you. The statement of purpose is the piece that you have the most control over, and that makes a huge impact on your application. So just kind of pay really close attention to all of those things. I've been responding to some folks' questions with our master's program website. Definitely recommend checking that out and looking at the programs of study for each of our programs. You can really kind of mock up your own curriculum, what it would look like, what concentration you might want to choose, what electives you might want to choose, and picking the program that feels best for you. And then if you're admitted to any programs or when you're admitted to programs, really kind of getting a sense of which program would be the best fit for you.
All right. Thank you all for your thoughtful questions, and a big thank you once again to Dr. Spear and Daniel for sharing their time and insights with us today. We hope today's masterclass gave you a deeper understanding of how corporations are shaping international relations and why interdisciplinary learning is key to addressing global challenges in the 21st century. For those interested in pursuing a master's degree at the Elliott School of International Affairs, See Global Education and the GW team are here to guide you through every step from exploring programs to navigating the admissions process. Thank you all once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing many of you take the next step towards becoming future global change makers. Thank you. Thank you so much, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you all.
Bye.